Okay, welcome back. Now in this first section, I'm going to give you a little review, cover some concepts that I believe you should know pretty well by now, and then we'll take it a little step further. So as you know, numbers rule. You got to know your numbers. I know you probably have gone through this before. You got to take every scale and you got to number it. Now when it comes to ear training, what you're doing is you're listening for those numbers. In my head, when I hear a song, when I hear something being played, I'm not trying to hear C major going to F major. Now, people that have perfect pitch, it's said, 1 in 10,000 people have perfect pitch. They can do that. James Rubel from the Jazz 101, Jazz 201, he's like that, where I can literally play something and James Rubel will say an E flat minor 7, flat 5. He'll do it right on the spot. But everybody's not like that. It's like half of a percent of people out there. But the other group, the majority, and in this case, it is fine to be in the majority. Most of the time, go the opposite way, though. But for the rest of the folks, relative pitch is what's important in playing by ear. And all that means is that you're hearing things relationally. You're not really hearing absolutely. Absolutely is to basically say A is going to C, C is going to E, E is going to G, or D flat is going to B flat. You're hearing that. You don't have to have that. Okay, so if you think when you're listening to a song in the car that you got to know the letters that are being played, the roots, the bass notes as letters, you're wrong. That's the first thing. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. That's like perfect pitch. But what you need to be able to do is hear how the first tone of the scale sounds, or the chord played on the first tone. You need to be good at hearing how that sounds moving to the sixth tone. Grill yourself. When you're playing songs that go from a C major chord, the first tone of the scale, to an A minor chord, which is the sixth tone of the scale in C major. When you're playing songs, just stop and be cognizant of how it sounds, what mood it makes, something that you can relate it to, that you know already, some kind of connection that you can make in your mind, so that when you hear that again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same C major going to A minor, but you're hearing this relationship of a 1 chord going to a 6 chord. That's what you really want to get good at. And when you're able to talk and think and convey yourself in numbers musically, then you're able to learn songs, and not only learn songs and hear what's going on, but relate songs together, because the numbers, that's a universal language, if that makes sense. So if I'm learning a song and I'm just going from C to A, well, that ain't gonna do me any good because I'm stuck in that box. But if I know how a 1 to 6 progression or pattern sounds, a 1 chord going to 6, I can take that to any key. And while it's gonna sound different in another key, it's pretty much gonna sound the same relatively. You know that it sounds the same. Let me show you. So if we're in the key of C, now most people know that you can keep your right hand on C, E, G and move your bass to A, and that'll give you an A minor 7 chord, because this is an A minor 7 chord, A, C, E, G. You learned that in chord county. So that's a trick right there. You keep the C major. Some people put the D. Some people get rid of the C and just put the D, E, G. I'm not here to teach you chords, but when you go to that A, it sounds like that. Now this is a lot of songs, You are not alone, I am here with you. Da-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na, something like that. A lot of songs. I get you say. I think it's either that or it's either you say. And something about the second tone and the fourth tone, they relate to each other. I'll tell you that later. So a lot of songs, whereas they'll go from the 1 to the 6, from there, it's usually either going to be a 2 to the 5 or a 4 to the 5, but it makes the same sound. You can almost substitute them. So the idea is when you hear that 1 going to 6, you're not just saying, okay, let me get good at learning how a C major goes to an A minor. No, you want to get good at hearing how the first tone of the scale sounds going to the 6th tone of the scale. And I'm going to turn it up a little bit. So 1, 6. Now, does that sound that different than a 1 to 6 in F? Do you hear the relation? Let's go to F. Let's reset our ear, because sometimes our ears get stuck in C. Doesn't that sound the same as this? Don't that sound the same? And if you wanted to do a check, just sing. You are not alone, I am here with you. See how it's the same thing? It's just in another key, but literally if you sung the song, it would match. You just have to sing it in the new key. Now you can't be singing in the key of C and now somebody's playing it in the key of F, you're gonna be in trouble. You're gonna be one of them ones that people be like, you off. But relationship-wise, it's the same thing. Let's take the same relationship to the key of G. You got 1 to the 6, and it's so easy because, you know, the pattern that we're using, we don't really have to change our right hand, so it's easy to remember. 1, 6. Can you do the same thing? Can you go, I need to sing it better. I guess you say. Can you do the same thing? Can you go, I guess you say, what can make me feel this way? You can do the same thing. Now, how does that sound in the key of F? Couldn't you go, I guess you say, what can make me feel this way? What about in the key of C? Oh, you guys making my singing feel good. Now, I'm not a singer, but, you know, for the purposes of this course, you know, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna sacrifice. I guess you say, what can make me feel this way? So the point is, other than making myself look like a fool, is that everything is relational. So you don't want to get stuck just in one key. You want to be able to say, that sounds familiar. What is it in this key? What is it in that key? And hear just the general sound. Some of it is just intuitive. You just got to hear it. You know that that produces a certain sound. And even if you're guessing or you're in a car, try to sing a melody of something that you know goes with those chords. So if you're hypothesizing, if you will, that, I bet this chord progression is going from the first tone of the scale to the sixth, you know, to test your hypothesis, to test your guess, try to sing a song, you know that goes from the 1 to the 6. A lot of songs do it. So, you know, try to do that. And that'll connect you. Now, that was just one example. Now, every tone of the scale, you got to be good to know, you know, how does the 1 sound going to the 6? How about the 1 going to the 5? How about the 1 going to the 4? How about the 1 going down to the 7? For example, this 1 chord right here, it sounds a certain way going down to the 7 tone. Okay? It sounds totally different than that 1-6 we were doing. Remember when we were going, that's totally different. Totally different than, you know it's something close. You hear stepwise motion, like you hear that it's close. And when it sounds that good, when it sounds like that, you know you're not going far, okay? The difference in like something like this and like going way over here, that's a little different than, you know, you can kind of hear in your head, you can hear the movement is close. So you shouldn't be guessing tones all over the place. Go right next door and see what happens. So this C coming down to the 7 tone of the scale, that sounds a certain way versus C going to the 6 tone of the scale or the 1 going to the 6. Okay, so we're gonna do a little exercise. We're gonna do the difference between the 1 going to the 6, like the first example, and the 1 coming down to the 7. Now, when you think about the 1 coming down to the 7, we think about stuff like ballads. Like in gospel music, that's like a song like, no weapon. I had to slide into that key. I know I'm not a singer. Formed against me. See, songs that move down like that. Some of those songs just go straight down the scale. They just go straight down. It won't work, no weapon. You know, it just goes down. Same thing. Jesus is the answer for the world today, and it just goes down. So I think of those ballad songs. When you think, and you get a similar feel even when the one comes to the six. You get, you know, you get that too, you know, but it's a nuance, you know. So let's get good at hearing the difference between and, okay, you hear the difference, da, da, and this one, da, da. Okay, all right, so let's do a test. Here's the first progression. I'm gonna keep it in the key of C right now, but then I'm gonna move it. Okay, so this is a test. I'm not gonna show you, you gotta listen. So is it a 1-7 right next door, or is it a 1-6? You got it? I'll even change the chord up a little bit. What's going on there? Or if you said 1 going to the 6, you were right, because that's the dominant sound in there. And that starts off, you know. So that's that. Now, what about this one? Different kind of chord. I'm changing the chord, but same tone, and that's what you're listening for, the tone. Then you can figure out the chord. I tricked you again. That's another 1-6. Now let's go to a new key. What's that? Okay, you should have guessed a 1 coming down to the 7. Doesn't it sound closer? It's like right next door. It sounds, to me, I like the 1 coming down to the 7 better personally, especially for worship, you know. And then, you know, that's like a no weapon right there. A lot of songs do that. So that's the beginning, just hearing that 1 coming down to 7. Now, eventually, there's something that we should point out. Eventually, you do get to the 6, but the 7 is right in between it, and it changes up the feel. Okay? You have other progressions, 1 going to the 4, 1 going to the 5. You know, being able to hear the difference between those, that's what's very important. So what we're going to do in this segment, that was just sort of the intro to it. We're going to study every tone of the scale. And first of all, we're going to look at what falls naturally on those tones of the scale, which you should already know. And we're going to hear, how does that sound? What's supposed to happen there? And because there's a default sound that you listen for in music, and there's this accidental sound where things that aren't supposed to go there, they go there in particular songs, but your ear immediately recognizes it. So it's that difference of, here's the norm, here's what's supposed to happen on every tone of the scale, and here's stuff that we substitute in and we improvise with. And that's where we're going to go now. Okay, so let's go back to the key of C. So as you know, the first tone of the scale is major. But sometimes we put a dominant chord. You know, this is kind of like a 13 chord right here without the 11 in it. So a lot of people do that. Now that's a different kind of 1 chord. So the difference in this, you know, you got to be able to say, okay, that's the norm, because I know major falls on the first tone of the scale. And then when you do that, you just figure out like the highest note. Now, the first thing I do, there's different methods. Like Gospel Keys 101 covers more harmonization. So yes, you're picking out the melody first and then finding the triad that goes with the melody. But when you get into chord patterns and bigger structures, really the focus goes to what the left hand is doing. So when you're listening to a cassette, you know, you're actually trying to pick out, okay, the bass is going from, I'm hearing the 1, okay, that's the 1 to the 4, okay, 1 to the, no, that sounds like the 3, 1 to the 3, and then it goes to the 4. You know, it's trial and error. You're picking out the bass. But then at that point, if it sounds normal, typical, you know, sounds like something that goes, sounds like something could have been in another song, doesn't sound new or fresh or different, usually it's going to be the diatonic chords, the chords that work, that fall on the certain tones of scale. So when you hear this, you know when a song starts, you know, on the 1 and it sounds like that, it's pretty much a regular chord. It might have the 9 in it. They might do a grace note. They might do a chordal chord. You know, but it's a 1 chord. It's happy. It sounds like it begins our song. When you see one of these, you know, you hear songs that have that on the 1, and usually they have that F coming down to E. I'm playing F, A, B flat, D, and then C on my bass, but I'm not here to teach you chords. You know, that's a dominant chord. You may even get, you know, chords like this or chords like that. You know, these are all, that's a more bland one. You know, that tells you, okay, I'm not doing a normal diatonic chord. I'm still on the 1, but we've taken it to the blues realm. So you know a lot of your chords are going to be dominant chords. You know, you're going to be doing R, E, S, B, C, G. You know, you're going to be doing a lot of dominant bluesy stuff. But you need to be able to hear the difference between, okay, a typical 1, a diatonic kind of 1, major 1, and a bluesy 1, because that's usually what's going to happen. Minor, if the minor is, if you're going to play a minor chord on the 1, usually you're in a minor key, okay? Which you know the trick with minor keys. Like if I was really in C minor, I would think of E flat major. Because see, these are relatives. E flat is the major, but if you go to the 6th tone of E flat, remember how we taught you how to find your minor scales? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you go to the 6th tone of E flat, you'll find that this C, it's the minor mode or Aeolian mode, and these two, they share the same notes. So if you knew the E flat major scale, you could play the C major scale, or the C minor scale rather. You can play the C minor scale basically by knowing the E flat major scale. Just go up the E flat major scale from C to C. Same thing happens with the chords as well. So when I'm in C minor, I'm actually thinking of E flat major. A lot of the, you know, a lot of stuff that I, you know, a lot of minor stuff, you know, it's basically like thinking in terms of the relative major, but off the 6th tone. It's like you're hanging out on the 6th tone a lot, but you know, you can think of it as major. It's a fine line. These are little tricks and stuff when you're playing by ear. And that's if the chord is minor, the 1 chord. That's usually going to put you in a minor mode. But for the most part, when it's major, typical. When it's dominant, also very common, but not the norm, but you need to immediately be able to go there, okay? The 2nd tone of the scale is minor. You learned this already, so you could get a minor 9 chord, you know, all kinds of stuff. You can get a, you know, this kind of chord, also minor 9 in a different inversion, you know, but that's the norm. Okay, so that's diatonic chord. It naturally happens. If you take every other tone of the scale, well, here you would get the DFA that you learned in Chord County. That's normal. Okay, when I hear a song, happy birthday, that's the D minor going to a G sus chord, suspended chord. But I haven't really changed my right hand. Happy birthday to, and then we just, you. When I hear that, that's common. That's what's supposed to happen, okay? But if I hear, uh-oh, happy birthday, but I can still kind of sing that, but we've taken it bluesy again. To, And it still works with my second chord, or. Now, the difference is that D, it's minor here, and my ear should automatically pick on, okay, that sounds normal, but when it hears this, it should know that, that is a dominant chord right there. And that's different. Here's some other way. That's another way to play it, like a gospel way. We cover that in Gospel Keys 102. But, that's another way. So, you need to be able to hear the difference. And usually that's what's going to happen on the second tone. When you hear that, just know that you can go two ways with it. Minor being the main one, because that's what happens diatonically in the scale. But also here for nuances. Is it a majory sound, which makes it bluesy when it's on the second tone? Even though it's a major chord, when you put it here, it's bluesy. I mean, it's really a dominant chord, but even if it was major by itself, when you have that C, it makes it a D dominant 7 chord. That's blues all the way, And then, you go over here to this G chord, and then you bring it back home. Okay, so know the difference between more serious, and that sounds serious, does it? That sounds different than, or even. Very different. Okay, third tone of the scale for the same purposes is just like the second tone of the scale. You get an E minor on the third tone of the scale if you take every other tone of the scale, but sometimes, you can do E major. That's a little different. It takes you to A, or, you get that kind of stuff going on, especially when you're doing secondary dominant chords, when you actually, substitute these chords, you make them dominant, and they lead to other tones of the scale and make those tones feel like home. Because keep in mind, the fifth tone of the scale, as we're going to get to, is dominant. It has the strongest pull home, and when you do that to other tones of the scale, when you turn those into dominant, it kind of, pushes them to the next key. This D dominant 7 chord, we could very well be in the key of G, because that's what the chord would be if we were in the key of G, but we're not. We're in the key of C, so we've temporarily made it kind of like a dominant. And when you're not in the same key as the key it should be dominant in, that's when you call it a secondary dominant, okay? Don't want to confuse you, and it's not even something that you have to know. Just know that D minor or D dominant, same thing. E minor or E dominant, and you get a stronger pull, and that was started with the E minor. You get that in songs, okay? So here when it's a normal minor, a lot of times we'll play a G major, we'll take the fifth tone of the scale and play that over the 3 bass, very common in gospel music. Because what does that create? Think about it. It creates the E minor 7 chord. So we think separately. We put G in different inversions. And then if you think about it, remember in the beginning when I said you could play C major over the 6th tone? Well, the same thing happens with the 3rd tone. You could play G major over the 3rd tone, because if you were in the key of G, you would be able to do that 1 to 6 thing we talked about, remember? So it's like you're borrowing stuff from other keys, ideas to make things easier for you. So in the key of G, this would have been the 1, and this would have been the 6. You got me, right? Well, in the key of C, it's the same thing. Same exact thing. Those keys are very closely related if you look on the circle of fifths. So no surprise that you could put a G chord over E. Matter of fact, remember when we went to the key of F and we kept F down, but then we went to the 6th tone of F, which was D? Well, what does that give us? It gives us the same D minor 7 chord. So when it comes to minor and major, there's a fine line. You pretty much have your primary chords. You got C major, F major, and G major. That's the 1, the 4, and the 5. And then you have your secondary chords, the 2, the 3, the 6, and the 7. That creates your scale. So if we're working with primary and basically secondary, you got your primary, 1, 4, and 5. You got your secondary chords, everything else, 2, 3, 6, and 7. Let me show you a trick. That all you really need to know is your primary chords, and you can play all the other chords, okay? So C major, that's C, E, G. F major, F, A, C. G major, G, B, D. If you skipped all the other chords, I'm punishing you right now. I'm not repeating these. These are in chord counting, okay? But basically, C major goes with A major. Let me hit myself, because I shouldn't talk letters. The 1 and the 6 go together. They're relatives. You can keep your right hand the same and move your bass and interweave between both of them. You can change inversion. It doesn't matter, it'll sound the same. Basses work. Play this chord over the 6th tone and you get the minor 7th of the 6th tone, okay? Same thing, when you go to the 4th tone of the scale, which is the 2nd primary chord, it goes together with the 2nd tone of the scale. Okay? Because if you think about it, if we were separately in the key of F, this would be 1-6. So it's like we're borrowing a 1-6 relationship and putting it all under the umbrella of C major. So these go together. And then the 5th tone of the scale, G major and E minor. I can keep my G major the same and go to E minor. That's why you get a lot of this. If you think about it, those are the chords, a popular song, I Do Worship by John P. Key. And all I'm doing is going from G major, C major, F major. So a 5 chord, going to the 1 chord, going to the 4 chord. But look at my bass. The bass is using that same concept. It's an E minor 7, but you know, I'm just thinking of it as a G over E. When I get to the 6th tone of the scale, I'm thinking of that as C major over A. And then when I get to the 2nd tone of the scale, I'm thinking of that as F major over D, or the 4 chord over the 2. So in my right hand, I've literally gone up the circle of fifths. I've gone G to C, F, and that's it. And then you can end it on G, and then it just repeats. G, C, F, G, C. And the bass is what does E to A, D, G. So it's about knowing these relationships. This happens a lot in gospel music. Or something like that. It happens a lot. And really the right hand is still playing primary chords. That's how easy it is. And then the 7th tone of the scale, it's actually a little different because it's a diminished chord. It connects with the minor. So it's like the minor has a relative itself, you know, and it's minor. So that's what gives you the half diminished chord on the 7th tone of the scale. But don't worry about that one. Really, these major and minors are the most important. So, you know, you keep going up the scale, you know, F major, the difference between major and dominant, G major and, you know, G dominant. You can hear the difference between major and then the dominant. Sometimes minor. That happens a lot too in gospel music, where the 5th tone, instead of being major or dominant, it's minor. So you got to hear that too, but that falls under the, that's different. And when you get that, it's usually you get that when you're going to the 4. Now why? Why would we turn the 5th tone of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how could we possibly turn that into a minor chord? Because Jermaine, you said it's usually always major and dominant. So things like this happen a lot. So you're literally like, when you're going to the 4th tone of the scale, try to think in your head, since the 5th tone in our scale is minor, it must be setting us up to go to the 4. Because if we were in the key of F, what would be the 2nd tone? It would be G. What would it be? The 2nd tone is always what? Minor. So So, or that, you know, that's the same chord in the key of C. But now that we're in the key of F, it's a 2, 5, 1, a jazzy one. But so while this would end my song in the key of F, it's taking me somewhere in the key of C. So keep that in mind. And when you're looking at the circle of fifths, chords or major scales that are neighbors, they have a lot of this going on, where you could literally take stuff from other keys. So if you start hearing that, all of a sudden, it's not that accidental anymore. It's not that different when you know where it comes from. It just comes from the next key, a neighbor on a circle of fifths. Just like borrowing some toilet paper from your neighbor. I've never done that, but had it done to me back in the day. So that's usually going to be the main reason for the fifth tone turning into a minor chord. Now in the sixth tone, you know, between the second, third, and sixth tone, they're pretty much going to have the same functionality. You could do minor on it, minor 9, you get fancy. You can do dominant on there, major. It'll give you a different feel. And your ear has to get good at hearing the difference between, you know, this and that. See, the only thing I'm doing differently, I'm still doing that C-E-G trick. I can do that, but if I want to make this major, see, this C makes this minor, but all I got to do is raise my thumb and I can go, okay? Same thing, you know, but a little different. I mean, if we went, I guess you say, but what if you went, I guess, your melody would have to change, you know? So you should clearly hear that. It would sort of clash. If you went, I guess, you would have to, like, it's kind of different now. You say, or I don't know, something. Nina Lockhart and the vocal cords could connect that together. But, you know, clear distinction is different than, and where that comes from, what people will do, they'll take it a step further and play this. They'll play a diminished chord, because you're already almost at a diminished chord. When you take the C major and raise it, you might as well play this B flat there. So it's sort of like it's like a dominant chord raised, you know, dominant chord, but then the C is raised to C sharp, and you get C sharp, E, G, B flat with the A bass. And yes, you mix the sharps and flats in this case. So a lot of people do that, but it started out as just substituting this dominant chord. You know, we want to play a major chord here, you know, with a G. So we made it a dominant chord because we wanted to mix up the song. We know the common way is A minor, but let's do dominant there. So what you find sometimes is songs that do all dominant substitutes. So you got the C major going to A dominant going to D dominant 9, and then that going to G suspended, or yeah, G sus 11, or sus 4 with a dominant 7 in it, and then bringing us home. We've almost substituted every tone, but this sounds a lot different than, that's the common way. Can you clearly hear? Can you clearly hear that? Definitely different. Okay, so that's the sixth tone. Seventh tone of the scale, you know, it's going to be what we call, it's a minor chord 2, but it has a flat 5, okay? And another way to say this chord is a half diminished 7th chord. Ooh, big word. And we should have covered this earlier. But it's really, if you take out the B right here, it's really a D minor chord over B, or the second tone of the scale over the 7th tone. So a lot of people think separately like that. They think small chords over here and then bass notes. And you can very well do that. You get that a lot in gospel music, even that melody. But it's really, that's a D minor chord over B. That's the most common thing, you know? Some people, what they'll do is they'll substitute that as well. You know how when we were in A minor, we changed that into a major chord? which created a whole dominant thing. When we added the G up here, we did the same thing on the third tone of the scale. We changed that to major, and then we did the same thing on the second tone of the scale. We changed that to dominant, major. You know, we just flipped it. Well, you can do the same thing here. You know that this is basically the second tone of the scale as a minor chord, D minor in this case over B. What if you made that major? People do that too. And what they'll do, they'll extend it. And then they'll go to like the third tone, and they'll play an altered chord. We call this a sharp 9, sharp 5 chord. You learned that. And then minor 9. So it's the same thing, really, if you think about it. We just took the B and changed it into major. So we turned it in, and it's like we turned the right hand into major, but collectively this turned it all into a B minor 11 chord, a huge chord. And then we went to a dominant chord on E, but it was a sharp 9, sharp 5, but still a dominant chord. So substitute, and then, but we ended on a regular typical minor chord with a 9 in it. So, you know, you kind of get good at knowing because, okay, you know, okay, the norm, and then you know what's away from the norm. When it's away from the norm, you go down your chordal vocabulary. You go down the list and you find things that could possibly work. So at the end of the day, you got your diatonic chords, you got the major, minor, minor, major, dominant, minor, half diminished or diminished. And I say half diminished or diminished because when you're playing 3-finger chords, it's going to be major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. When you're playing 4-finger chords, it's going to be major 7, minor 7, minor 7, major 7, dominant 7, minor 7, and half diminished 7. You get that B, D, F, A, or D minor over B. You get that whole thing going on. As you know, each of them has flip sides. The first tone of the scale can go major, it can go dominant, bluesy, like an R-E-S-P-E-C-T. It can go minor, but usually that is a big indication that you're now in a minor key, and you can use that cheater way. You know, you can say, what's the third tone of this minor scale? That'll give us the relative major. And we can actually play in that relative major key, interweave in and out, and it'll feel like the same key. In other words, C minor feels like E flat major. C is a 6th tone of E flat major, or E flat major is the third tone of C if you're going up the C minor scale. We know the second tone of the scale. It can go minor by default, but then it can go dominant and major, altered. We know the third tone pretty much is the second tone up a whole step. It can do the same thing. Fourth tone is like the first tone, just up, you know, up 4 scale tones. Fifth tone does a little differently, you know, it's dominant by default. You know, bluesy gives us a really strong pull home, but it can go minor at times, and it can go minor in such a way that the song doesn't feel minor. See, when the first tone of the scale and the fourth tone of the scale go minor, that's a big indication you're probably in a minor key, because those are usually major chord tones. You know, those are big deals. In major key songs, when a key is major, the 1 being major and the 4 being major really solidifies the song as major. It's going to have a happy, positive sound. When the 1 goes minor and the 4 follows it as minor, usually that's an indication that, you know, you're in a minor key or some kind of borrowed situation. But the 5th tone can go minor because you learned of how it temporarily takes us to the key of F, or it provides a transition to F. So really F is still major. That main tone is still going. In this case, the 5th is not really acting like a primary chord. It's acting sort of like a passing chord. It's acting like a regular, you know, minor chord in the key of F. So you got to know those differences, and you got to hear those differences as you're playing. 6th tone of the scale, minor, dominant, major, just like the second tone and third tone. Those are like the same. You can take the D minor, the E minor, and the A minor, and they have the same concepts in the key of C, or the second, third, and 6th. And then the 7th tone being a little different, being a half diminished chord. You know, it had the same similar concept, but now we're taking that minor chord off the second tone of the scale and working with it. You know, so we get sort of like a D minor over B. And with that, we can do different things like change the D minor to D major and keep the B, and now it changes our whole chord up. So those are the major changes, you know, in songs. Next, we're going to talk about some of the in-between things, the passing chords that you want to hear. They're not in the key, but it's a dead giveaway that we've gone outside the key to borrow other tones. And that's what we're going to cover in the next segment.